The writer Elaine Scarry wrote in On Beauty, how one walks through the world, the endless small adjustments of balance is affected by the shifting weights of beautiful things. Balance is at the heart of Paula Whyman's debut collection, You Might See a Stranger, a debut that received a rare starred review from Publishers Weekly. The balance in familial duty and dread, in love and resentment, in desire and guilt. Spanning more than 3 decades, we follow the life of Miranda Weber as she moves about her world with a mixture of humor and heartbreak, bad decisions and good. It's a book of subtlety and grace, filled with occasions that will feel at once familiar and extraordinary. The New Yorker called it a delicate balance of mundane moments and acute ones. In an interview with the Chicago Review of Books, Paula Whyman said her ambition for the collection would be to illuminate the experiences that shape a person, the pivotal, liminal moments that foretell who we become. In her literary career, Paula Whyman has become a writer to watch. Sorry, Post-it. Her writing has appeared in McSweeney's Quarterly, Plowshares, the Virginia Quarterly Review, the Washington Post, the Rumpus, and on NPR's All Things Considered. She teaches in the Writers in Schools program through the Penn Faulkner Foundation in Washington, D.C., and the Hudson Review in Harlem and the Bronx. She's a fellow of the MacDowell Colony and Yaddo, and a member of the MacDowell Colony Fellows Executive Committee. A music theater based on a story from her book is in development with composer Scott Wheeler, and she was just named, just a couple of days ago, one of Poet and Writer's 5 debut authors over 50 to watch. Those of us who are teetering really close to the edge of 50 are like, they like me, they really like me. But perhaps most exciting to those of us who are here tonight, she's one of American University's most esteemed graduate creative writing alums. Please welcome Paula Whyman.
Wow, thank you. That was a really wonderful introduction. And is this the right place to, okay, awesome. This is actually my dream to come back here. And I maybe that seems silly, but when I was a student here, it was really one of the things that that I daydreamed about. Oh, maybe someday I'll be standing up there. So I'm standing up here now. It's kind of freaking me out a little bit, but it's cool. And I want to thank Rachel and Richard and Dolan and everyone who brought me here today. I'm really grateful for so many things that the program gave me. I was in the workforce for several years before I came to school to get my MFA, and I had been an editor for several years, and I decided I wanted to devote time to my own writing, and like many of you probably had similar goals. I wanted to work with talented faculty. I wanted to read and analyze great literature. I wanted to learn from talented peers, and I wanted time to just write, to be able to experiment, write well and badly, which I did often. And I was really so happy to be in a place where my only job was to do the thing I loved and also sometimes hated. And having permission to devote myself to writing in that way was a privilege. So you're all very lucky in that. I came away from this program with some big things I didn't have when I started and things I didn't anticipate. First, on a craft level, a more well-developed voice and more confidence in my writing and in the idea that maybe I had something to say. I had better judgment about my own work and about other writers' work. I discovered things about my work and began to identify some things that were holding me back, namely being too concerned about what people might read into the things that I wrote, And over time, when I finally let go of that, I think I was able to write with more emotional honesty. And that started here. Very important thing that I gained in this program was a community. And as we all know, writing is isolating work, and it's crucial to spend time around people who understand what you're trying to do without you're always having to explain it to them. I can't overstate the importance of that. The relationships that develop in the program are enriching in both anticipated and unpredictable ways. I found trusted readers here. Everyone in my current writing group is an AU MFA alum, and all very talented writers, and I think probably they've all maybe stood here, actually, at some point in their careers. I found mentors here. For instance, I exchanged work for many years after I graduated the program with Kermit Moyer, who was my thesis advisor. He's now retired. And in fact, I was at his house when I signed my book contract. So that was pretty cool. After I graduated, this is sort of a little bit of the troubled part that happens after you graduate. You're all like excited, you've had all this great time to write, and then suddenly you're out in the real world, right? And the real world kind of sucks. So in comparison, so something that I already knew a little bit about was really driven home in the intervening years. I graduated at the end of 2000, and you might notice my book came out this May. So there were other things going on in that time. The process of writing and getting published, as many of you know, is slow and full of frustration. And at each step, there are moments of often soul-crushing discouragement. But these bad times alternated with enough bright, shiny moments that I was encouraged and validated enough to keep me going for 15 plus years. So this is why patience is important, and it's important not to rush your work. This is why persistence is important. You can't just be a writer, you have to actually write. And every step will seem like it's taking forever, because it does. Even when you've got an agent, even when you have a publisher, every step, it just feels maddeningly slow. Even when something good is going to happen, you know it's going to happen, still, if you're not naturally a patient type of person, this may drive you a little bit nuts. And maybe you have to be a little bit nuts to persist in this line of work. I'm convinced of that. I mean, maybe it helps to be in a little bit of denial of reality when it comes to being hopeful amid all the rejection and lack of response, etc. And then the hope is that eventually there's this happy ending. That's my 2 cents, or 25 cents maybe. This book, You May See a Stranger, is a linked story collection, and many of you probably know what a linked story collection is. It can be many different things, and in this case, the stories follow the life of one woman, Miranda Weber, from her teen years to middle age, beginning in about 1980 and going forward for more than 30 years. So Miranda ages over the course of the book, and the stories are arranged chronologically, touching down at different points in her life. So she comes of age, and there's a troubled marriage, difficult children, a fraught relationship with her developmentally disabled sister, and so on. The book is set in DC primarily and reflects what was happening historically and culturally during those years. Miranda's personal traumas and difficulties are filtered through the concerns of the time. So there's a story set during the crack epidemic in the late 1980s. There's a story set during the 2002 sniper attacks, the Gulf War, and even a story involving teenage sexting. So the stories can stand alone, but taken together, they form a novelistic arc, covering a large part of Miranda's life. I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to read from the title story, which is actually the third story in the book. In the first story, when the book opens, Miranda is 15 years old, and by this third story, she's in her early 20s. So that story is You May See a Stranger. I can see there are people here. You may see a stranger. Pogo wants to pay for everyone. It's a big night for him, and he's taking us to the country club. Cheever and his girlfriend are coming too. Cheever is Pogo's younger brother. Their father's name is on a plaque somewhere in the building. On a bar stool, Pogo joked. His name's the same as yours, Cheever told him. Pogo has wads of cash in his pocket. I have a small square of paper in my purse. It's proof of something I don't quite believe. When the doctor said it, I thought of an incubator and chicks, my body as a holding area, warm, but like everything else, temporary. Pogo will eventually show everyone the cash. I don't plan to show anyone the paper. This is Pogo's big night, not mine. One big night at a time seems like a good philosophy. Cheever and Natasha are already at the bar when we arrive. Natasha's glass is full and sweating in her hand. She swirls the yellow straw between her fingers. Cheever orders a gin and tonic for himself. He and Pogo don't look like brothers, but they look related. They slap each other on the back with friendly hostility, which leads into a wrestler grip hug held a few beats too long. I'm proud of you, says Cheever. He tries to mess Pogo's hair, but Pogo blocks him. Pogo tries to mess Cheever's hair instead, except he can't because it's short and bristly, so it ends up looking like a plush carpet you stroked in the wrong direction. Pogo orders drinks for both of us. He's had 2 already before we got here. 1 before we got in the car, and 1 he finished on the way to the club while I drove. His cheeks and his nose are pleasantly red. At the bar, I hold up the car key for him to take, and he shows me his pocket. I reach over to slip the key into his khakis, and he grabs my fingers. The other one, he whispers in my ear. I put the key in his other pocket, on the side facing away from Cheever and Natasha, the side without the wad of cash in it. I reach all the way in to stroke him through the lining of his pocket. He isn't wearing underwear. I can feel the hard curve of him. If I try, I think I can feel his blood rushing. He keeps talking, leaning up against the bar. He leans toward Natasha. While he talks, he touches her with his hand that holds the drink, as if he might rest the glass on her shoulder. I squeeze a little. He flinches in a way only I would notice, and he has to stop my hand and shift himself. All this he does seamlessly, while holding the drink in the other hand and expounding on the bakeries of the market. Pogo has an old Mercedes. His father has one too. His affection for old things confuses me. Some are quality, and some are just old. The idea is to look like they don't care about money or even think about it. If you've had enough of it for a long enough time, say generations, you don't think about it in the same way as other people. But that's someone else's money, and whenever Pogo manages to get his own, he wants everyone to know. In my family, what modest funds my parents earned were spent on my sister's doctors, and on the annual summer jaunt to a nearby mountain lodge, where Donna and I counted dead flies on the windowsill and held our noses against the smell of the septic tank. On the way to the club, Pogo and I stopped in the parking lot of Broder's, the gourmet grocery store. We shut off the car engine, but left the radio on. We parked at the far end of the lot, but I could still see people coming and going, pushing their carts, which were smaller and daintier than the carts at the front of the mill store. I didn't want to mess up my skirt by hiking it up to my waist, so I took it off. Pogo tilted the passenger seat back as far as it would go, and I straddled him. It was cramped, and I had to hunch my shoulders to avoid hitting the ceiling. At one point, I leaned forward all the way and lay on top of him, and he pushed me up with his pelvis and shouted, "Giddy up." I was so high up, I thought later about my naked bottom and the car's moonroof, and shouldn't I laugh about it? But I wasn't exactly thinking about it at the time. A vibration was beginning inside of me, like the background hum of an amplifier. Clapton was singing, "Nobody's lucky till luck comes along. Nobody's lonely till somebody's gone." That's when I came. Pogo already had a moment before. It was still daylight. I wasn't into it at first, doing it outside of Broder's, or even at all. Pogo could nearly always persuade me. He knew, and I knew, that I would end up feeling like it before he was done. After that, I drove us to the club. The thrumming in my body continued to reverberate in seeming rhythm with the rattling diesel engine. I wanted to be still for a while longer and let it finish whatever it was doing to me. Pogo said, "You in the cheaper seats, clap your hands. The rest of you, just rattle your jewelry." This was John Lennon at the Beatles' Royal Command performance. Pogo was fond of reminding me. "Am I the queen?" I asked. "You are the queen of all you survey," said Pogo. "The Broder's parking lot?" I said. "Your fiefdom. Are you my serf?" I asked. "I serve no one," said Pogo. "Ugh," I said. When we got to the club, I went to the ladies' room. There were hand towels made of the same fabric you'd make cloth napkins out of, folded in rows on a table near the sink. I wanted to bring one into the stall with me to clean up from preceding events. I couldn't, though, because there was a black woman sitting on a chair in the room, wearing what looked like a nurse's uniform. She was an attendant. I wasn't sure what she was going to do for me, and I didn't have time to figure it out. My insides felt shaken up and rearranged, and standing in that dim room with the slightly antiseptic odor tipped the balance toward one arrangement rather than another. I bent over the toilet, my bare knees pressed into the knobby floor, and waited. I threw up again. After a while, it stopped on its own, and I sat on the rim in a weakened state, leaning to one side so I could feel the cool wall tiles. I could fool myself that I was empty, if only for a moment. I had a vision of my body turned inside out, gleaming pink, pristine. So much for that. My knees hurt, as if I'd knelt in pebbles. I sat for as long as I thought I could, awaiting with dread the attendant's tap on the stall door, or Pogo's voice outside the ladies' room calling to me. At that moment, nothing seemed more difficult than leaving the bathroom. When I finally emerged from the stall, the attendant handed me a cup of green liquid. She kept her face neutral and turned away. I smelled it. It was mouthwash. She probably thought I was drunk, like the other girls men try to impress, bringing them to the club for drinks before they get them into bed. But Pogo had done things in reverse, as usual. He didn't have to get me drunk first. He didn't even have to impress me. At the club's bar, I don't touch my drink right away. I'm not sure how much I want to drink. Same way I was unsure about having sex earlier. I'm resolutely not focusing on the possible reason. Pogo puts the glass in my hand. "Drink the potion," he says. He's always paying attention to how much other people drink. I know I'll oblige. I wonder if Pogo would still give me a drink if he knew. I can't imagine him suddenly becoming responsible. This is, after all, what I both want and don't want about him. Pogo's 10 years older than me. Most men his age are married. He thinks I won't push him. I play along. I'm only a year out of school, but it's as if I'm a grown-up. My doctor asked me, "Is the father someone you're serious with?" I said yes. "Then he'll do right by you," the doctor said. I laughed. The doctor looked at me sadly then. If that were the case, I wouldn't be pregnant. Or I suppose, when I forgot to take my pill, I could have said no. when Pogo said, excuse me, suspense. When I forgot to take my pill, I could have said no. When Pogo said just this one time, please. We'd been dating a year, and up to that time, I'd been very good about remembering it. I thought one time would be okay, and maybe it would have been, but if I'm honest, I'll also admit it was not just one time. If we had a boy, oh God, sorry. Seasonal allergies. If we had a boy, first Pogo would teach him how to pee on the side of the road. Then he would teach him persuasion. These are not bad things to know, just as it's not bad sometimes to let yourself be persuaded. Thank you. Okay, I'll stop choking in a minute. Anyone have any questions?
Okay, so you're parsing this story through memories of a very particular, or a series of particular moments in DC history. Where were you able to strike the balance between the things that you knew off the top of your head, or kind of knew organically, versus the things that you had to? Did you fact check yourself for any aspects of this book in terms of the scene setting?
That's a good question. I did have, there's, the old Soviet embassy makes an appearance in one of the stories, and I had to make sure I was right about time, chronology, things like that. I refer to the fact that our embassy in Moscow couldn't be occupied until, because it was full of bugs and anyway. So there were things like that I had to check. And I had to make sure I knew when the sniper attacks, like what months the sniper attacks actually occurred. So, yeah. Yes?
Why did you title the third chapter after the title of the book?
Well, I didn't really know what chapter it was going to be. It was more like I titled the book after that story, because I thought that story had thematic relationship with the book overall, and a metaphorical relationship with the book. So I wrote that story before I knew I was writing the book, actually. Yes?
Can you talk a little about sequencing, chronologically versus questions?
Oh, okay, yeah, sorry about that. The question was, how did I decide what to leave in and what to take out, and what order the stories would go in. I wrote the stories out of order, but I knew I wanted it to be chronological from the beginning. I knew there were going to be gaps between the stories, time gaps between the stories. And how did I decide? I had many different versions. I had many different lists of stories I intended to write, some of which I ended up writing and some I didn't. I was originally going to have stories from different points of view, other than Miranda's, and I decided against it. So the collection evolved, and what I decided to include evolved, but I tried to focus on episodes that I thought would be important to the character, not necessarily the big events that we all know about that happen in people's lives, the weddings and funerals and things like that, but the moments that don't seem important to anyone else, but that mean something to us as individuals. So that was always in my mind. Rachel.
I'm interested in the fact that we go 30 years, more than 30 years through this one character's life, and the moments that you're choosing to focus on are not like the big moments, right? Like, you know, we're not in the hospital when she gives birth. We're not there when her sister. Well, I don't want to give away what happened. In case no, yeah. But you choose instead to focus on I don't know moments that sort of shape who she is internally in a way. And I just wonder if you could talk to that decision, that artistic decision.
Okay, the question is, why did I decide to focus on maybe the aftermath of things, rather than the moment of drama, I guess?
Yeah,
Or
we're not at her wedding, we're not there with her child, you know, like those big life.
right,
moments.
the weddings and births and things like that. I guess I thought those events, people have certain ideas about those events, and there's a certain sequence that is expected when you imagine a wedding or a birth. So unless I wanted that to be a time when something really unusual happened, I was more interested in the things that happened around those things. Like, what happens after the baby's born? That was really interesting to me. What happens after a tragic death? What is the character left with? How does she deal with it? Why? It seems oversimplified for me to say I didn't want to write a wedding scene. I actually had a professor who once said, only women put party scenes in their books. I said, excuse me, Thomas Wolfe. Anyway.
Great Gatsby?
Yeah. I just didn't think, like I said, I was interested in the moments that would be memorable only for that person. And weddings and funerals and things like that are memorable to everyone involved. Yes?
So, do you write better from experience or from an understanding?
Oh, that's a good question. I write to gain understanding. So, I don't particularly write from experience, except you could say, well, I've been the ages of this character, and I am a woman, and I live in DC, or I have lived in DC. But the similarity mostly ends there. I'm interested in pushing my characters to the edge to see how far they'll go. And so I might start with a kernel of something real, something I observed or heard about or experienced. But then by the time I build a story around it, it's often unrecognizable even to me. A good example of that is the fight that occurs in the first story, which is based on something I witnessed. Most people read that story, A Driver's Education, which is about a girl in a driver's ed class, and there are two boys. There's like a bad boy and a good boy, and she's conflicted about it, and there's a racial tension in the classroom between the African-American teacher and a sort of redneck student. So most people read that story and think, people have actually said this to me, that I am the girl. And that part of the story, the girl and the two boys, really happened, and they're always really surprised when I say, well, actually, that's the part of the story I built around this fight that I really wanted to write about. So the fight was the thing, and the other stuff was made up. And even the fight was made up at the time I was done, because I couldn't even tell you now how it actually occurred, because I had to write it in a way that readers could see it and experience it. And I think too often if you try to write fiction based on something that really happened, you can't get distance from it. And you miss the important details that the reader really needs in order to be in the moment. Don't.
I was just thinking about
informs your writing, like in the way maybe Hiro's walking informs his writing. Or for some of us who have other practices such as yoga or biking, Rachel's smoking on a bike the other day. Where is she? Do you feel that you work out story ideas, etc., when you're running? Like, do you feel that there's connection there in terms of spiritual practice even? Or?
The question is, how does running inform my writing? How does it, how does it relate to my writing? And I do run, and I definitely write in my head while I'm running. And that's actually the only, if I could say that I write, but it's the only time I write and listen to music. It's while I'm running. And when I'm really distracted by other things and can't just let my mind go and think about a story while I'm running, it really bugs me. Because my mind goes blank. It's almost like a trance state. So I get really good ideas that just kind of appear. And then the challenge is trying to remember them for the next 4 miles. And I don't bring my phone, so I can't like talk into something. I have an old iPod because I don't want anyone to be able to reach me. So sometimes I'll just repeat words in my head to remind me of the thing. So I think one day I was going leather jacket, closet, refrigerator. I don't know. I was just saying like these weird disconnected words to help me remember whatever it was. But if I could go right from running and sit down at my desk like I would at an artist colony, that's an amazing way to write. I can't do it at home, but it works well. Yes?
I have a 2-part question, and you may have talked about this beforehand, but the first part is, what is your writing routine? And the second part is, what's the ratio within that time of actual writing to writing business? Because you have to send stuff
to
out.
writing business.
Send stuff out, apply for colonies, talk to your agent, get things lined up to sell.
The question is, what is my writing routine and how much of time is spent actually writing and as opposed to admin stuff? That's a really good question, and I think it depends what's going on. Like, since my book came out, I haven't spent much actual time writing, and I'm not complaining about that at all, but I am ready to get back to it. I tend to try to manage my time so that if I know I have a certain number of hours, I write. It's better if I write in the morning, and after lunch I take care of the things that don't require as much imagination. The colony applications, and although sometimes I'm doing that when I'm at a colony, which is also, because that's the deadline. And by the same token, I might write in the morning and edit in the afternoon or evening, depending what's going on. And I do try to go to my desk every day, 5 days a week, even if I don't actually get anything done. A lot of my time is spent staring into space and flailing around and writing down things that don't go anywhere. I wrote 2 draft novels before I wrote this book.
Maybe just one more question.
Okay.
We don't have a last question.
Yes?
How long did it take you to write the book?
To write the book. Well, I wrote the first story. The first story was published in 2005, and I didn't know at that time that I was writing a book. I would say I started writing the book intentionally at the end of 2012, and then I wrote the rest of it fairly quickly in about a year and a half. I guess I had written maybe 2 or 3 stories before that I ended up adapting in addition. So. Thank you.
So the bookstore does have Paula's book for sale. I apologize that they were unable to make it here tonight, but some of you may have your copy with you. I'm pretty sure she'd be happy to sign. So, thank you.